Welcome to A Very Liberal Life with me, Lembit Öpik, and
me, Mark Oaten.
Why do we call it a liberal podcast in the opener there? Heads will roll in the production department, Mark.
Oh, poor, but give him a break. Come on. I mean, we have changed the name a few times, but my God, we have lived liberal lives, Lembit, if you think about it. We are true. We actually walk the talk.
Well, you say that. I think you've lived a liberal life. I've been very conservative compared to you.
I think maybe you've just got away with it more than I've got away with it, Lembit, over the years.
No, not true. Sure. Right. You
have.
Left Parliament. I lost.
Well, that's true.
Where was the justice in that?
I know, you know, come on, what with cheeky girls, Weber girls, and me with my scandals, we've been pretty liberal in our lives. But you know what? We're here and we're still alive, and we've not broken any rules, and we're enjoying ourselves.
Speak for yourself, but maybe I'll enjoy the next half hour with you. In this show, A Very Liberal Life, we take a liberal look at current affairs. And I have to say myself and Mark are different in the fact that I am a liberal and he isn't. And some would say, no offense.
Basically, you would be the one that would say that. You're hardly liberal. Lately, you've been verging more to the right than I'm normally, Lembit.
What do you mean right? I've stayed where I am. Reform happens to have taken the space that used to be occupied by the Liberal Democrats.
It took about, 30 seconds before the name Reform creeped into this broadcast.
Reform UK, to be precise.
Okay, but they do they dominate everything. They even dominate our conversations as well. But look, I don't want to start with Reform. I want to start with the big issue of the last 24 hours, and that is Macron's state visit, all the pomp, all of the rolling out of the red carpet, the royals, the banquets. But behind all of that, it always comes back to this same issue whenever we talk about Macron and France, and that is the small boats. And at the moment, we've got discussions now about a new idea, the one in, one out policy. I'm not sure that dear old Nigel Farage would approve of that. But the bottom line is that we have to find a solution to this so-called small boats crossings. And as a liberal, I think we should be talking about this issue. I get a bit disappointed that the left and particularly the Liberal Democrats don't want to talk about the migrant crossings. It is a problem. It does need addressing, and it needs addressing in a way which is both competent and compassionate. And I'm not sure what you think, Lembit, about this one in, one out policy, but I'm not convinced. We haven't seen the detail yet, but it does seem to me to be a very bizarre solution to what should be a simpler way of resolving this issue. After all, we're an island. We have a channel. We should be able to manage our borders better, and France should be stepping up. This deal, it seems to me, to be almost acknowledging that what's happening will continue, and we'll just find some kind of equation to make it better.
Yeah, well, first of all, the problem is absolutely desperate. Every single day we have the same kind of pictures. Day in, day out, we have this kind of, well, frankly, horrendous offence to our sensibilities. Now, it's not that I'm against people coming to the country. I'm very, very against them coming here illegally. And so, you know, when you ask, they ask somebody, well, what do you think about, what do you want when you get here? They say, oh, well, we want, it depends what the government's going to give us. It's like, what on earth is that all about, you know? How can these people think that they're going to be treated well when they come here if they can't even respect our laws when they come in?
The images that we're seeing at the moment, Lembit, are of, I mean, they're horrendous at many different levels, from a compassionate situation in terms of the individuals putting themselves into this risk, but also they're horrendous to me for purely the inability of two great nations, France and the UK, to not be able to stop this happening. Whatever your views are on borders and whether you want to be welcoming migrants or not, this is not competent. How on earth is it that we can not stop these boats coming over the channel? The French have to step up. And I saw recently this week one of the French police going in for the first time, I think it was, saying they were allowed to enter the water with a knife to puncture one of these boats.
But they just did it for effect, Mark. I think they did it because the cameras were there. today, even this morning on the mainstream media, you had the cameraman filming people in these boats just waving goodbye. Now, I don't hold it against those individuals to want to have a better life. Let's face it, I'm an economic migrant from Northern Ireland to London. Why? Because of work. So I get it. It's not that these people are wrong to try to change their lives, but we're completely wrong to be a completely soft touch so that people can cross the channel like they are.
But what I don't understand is that we have a navy, for example. We must have, and the French must have, a system where for decades they've managed the channel, whether they're looking at fishing rights, whether they're looking at trying to stop drugs being transported over. All of a sudden, all of these controls that we've normally had with the channel to do with drugs and fishing rights seem to have just disappeared. Where is the navy? Where is the French navy?
Well, there's the French police with his hands in his pockets, waving them goodbye. I mean, it looks pathetic to me. The optics are terrible here. Look at it. There must be 60, 80 people on that boat. The police just wander up and down. It's not their problem. Once those boats, that lot go, then they're not a problem for the French.
And, you know, we talk about this as being an incompetent policy, which it absolutely is. At the moment, of course, the sea is calm. We thankfully haven't seen people dying, but we will, if this carries on, see 30, 40, 50 people die in one of these boats, for sure, if this carries on when the weather changes over the winter periods. And so we'll be dealing with not only an incompetent policy, we will be dealing with the failed cooperation between the French and the UK, but we will ultimately be dealing with a humanitarian crisis of a large number of people dying as well. I cannot believe that no government has been able to get a grip on this. And when it comes to this so-called one in, one out policy, my concern is that when migrants and others hear about that, in essence, they're thinking, well, do you know what? There's a 50-50 chance we'll get in then. You know, one in, one out. That's not bad odds.
But it's worse than that, because they're talking about 50 people a week in, 50 out. Think about the mathematics there. You don't have to have a first-class honours degree in algebra to figure out that 50 people go out when 50 people come in every week. Number one, doesn't reduce the numbers. It's net zero. And secondly, when you've got 1,000 people coming across every day, 7,000 a week at tops, 50 is not going to make a big difference, is it, Mark?
No, it's not. It's going to continue. It's not going to act as a deterrent. And frankly, if you are able to create an agreement or a policy where you can have an agreement with France to send individuals back, then why are we saying it's just going to be one in, one out? If the structure allows for that to happen, then it should be done on a much, much wider scale. But I come back to one of the concerns I have here. As a Liberal Democrat, it's really hard to discuss these issues because obviously we have a reputation as a party, as Liberals, have wanted to be compassionate. So the minute that I start talking aggressively about this small boat issue, it's seen as if maybe I'm not being liberal, I'm shifting to the right, I'm pandering to reform. Look, I'm not. I think it's perfectly legitimate for Liberals to be able to say this is wrong, what is happening is wrong, and there needs to be a competent solution to it. And if that means getting the Navy involved, if that means absolutely sticking knives into more of these boats to stop them coming over, we should be taking that tough action. I don't think that's being anti-liberal. I think that's just recognizing that this has got to stop, but because it's wrong.
The problem here is basically you will be thrown out of the Liberal Democrats for saying that, because you're not allowed to say that. The Lib Dems want to rejoin the European Union, even if it takes 10 referendums to do it. And as you say, go, oh, let's be compassionate. There's nothing very much compassionate for the people who have to endure the folks hanging around in the streets. I was in Canterbury not long ago to do a speech, and it went on quite late. I was walking back to the car, and it was like a street battle, clearly from people who weren't speaking English, but were fighting each other. I mean, the problem I've got with the whole situation is that no one's really accepting the fact that we are introducing social unrest and messing up the cultural norms in parts of the country which are most susceptible to this migration. That doesn't make you racist, Mark, to say it. but you're made to sound racist. Now, I know that you know that I'm pretty sympathetic to Reform UK, but that's in part because they're willing to call it out. And I have to say, I don't feel that any of the uni party, Labour, Lib Dem, Conservatives are, Mark.
Well, look, I think one of the issues that concerns me is if the, as you call them, the uni parties or the mainstream parties or the liberal parties don't discuss this issue, don't tackle this issue, we create a vacuum. And once you create a vacuum, it allows more extreme parties to come in and fill that vacuum. And so when you see the rise of what people say the so-called far right, when you see those kind of groups coming forward, who is to blame for that? Actually, it's the liberal centre to blame for not tackling some of these issues and having the courage to be able to get into that discussion. Now, to be fair to Starmer, he is putting it on the agenda with Macron, but I don't think he's going far enough. The Tories tried their ridiculous policy with saying that individuals were going to go to Rwanda. Labour are now going to try this one in, one out policy. I don't see either of these working. I do not understand why we're not having a more robust semi-military approach to this by monitoring our channel and asking the Navy and or police to be in the channel, monitoring this and turning boats back or stopping boats leaving France. The agreement we need from the French is that our police, if they're not prepared to do it, our police should be allowed to go onto their shores and take action. If the French, why can't we?
Macron does seem to be accusing Starmer of being a soft touch. It's a bad interpretation. I accept that, Mark, but certainly there is an element of the media that says, well, Macron's come over here to tell Starmer what to do, which doesn't say much for the coalition of the willing, or I call the coalition of the wilting, but he doesn't seem to own it. Macron doesn't own it, but he says if you get away from the pull factors that bring people to the United Kingdom, for which, by the way, Keir Starmer's culpable because he was instrumental, as I understand it, in making the benefit system a ton more attractive for people who managed to get onto the land. If you get rid of the pull factors, then people won't traipse all across France to try and get here, Mark.
Look, this is clever tactics by Macron because he's diverting attention away from his own failure to be able to manage his border and turning the language as if he's blaming the UK. My understanding is these so-called pull factors are essentially around the ability to have an underground economy, if you like, which can work outside of the system. But when you look at some of the facts behind this, actually the French economy has more pull factors for migrants. There's more non-official work and labour taking place in France than there is actually in the UK. So I think Macron is playing a bit of smoke and daggers here and trying to avert attention from his country's own failings in this area.
One thing he has in common with Keir Starmer is they're both comparably unpopular. Just a quick one. If you look at that, have they replaced Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, with the waxwork?
Well, some may argue that would be more effective than the current one that we have.
Oh, he's moving now, but he wasn't before.
Maybe struggling with Macron's French translation, who knows? But look, away from the migrant issues, let's just reflect a little bit.
I'll tell you, just before you do, though, as we said before, here's the beneficiary of it. No. I'm saving that for later, Mark. Thanks, team. You've just spoiled the surprise there. Pretend you didn't see that.
I'm definitely pretending I didn't see that. But yeah, the man on the screen now, Farage, is benefiting from all of this because there's no doubt at all. And he said something quite interesting yesterday, that the British public are probably more to the right of him on this immigration issue. I thought that was very, very telling. Look, everybody is scrambling around trying to solve this problem, and they're particularly trying to solve it because they know that it's playing into Reform's hand. But at the moment, I don't see this one in, one out policy being the solution.
No, and I would say, I have to say, obviously I am more than just sympathetic to Reform UK. I think if they can get the internal organisation sorted out, this is probably the next Prime Minister. And it's because of the utter incompetence of the other parties in dealing with one of these trigger issues. There are other things too. We won't not go down that reform path too much, but
We should talk about reform, Lembit, because look, it's been a extremely effective week for them, not only on the migrant issue, but also they've had 2 former Conservative MPs defect to them. And so that has been a boost to them. I expect there'll be more former MPs doing the same thing.
Let's do a whole show on that, because I agree. I think Reform's doing really well. They need to get their internal organization sorted out. As you know, in the 1990s in particular, I was one of the people instrumental in professionalizing the Liberal Democrats. I think the Reform Party UK need to do the same. But if they do, then I would say we're looking at the next Prime Minister there. Let's resist going too far further in that. Somebody else who's in a lot of trouble is Zelensky, I think. I have to say, I think I'm very much with Donald Trump on this one. Have a watch to see what he says here.
We're going to send some more weapons. We have to. They have to be able to defend themselves.
These are critical supplies upon which the lives of our people and the defense of Ukrainian cities and villages depend.
So it seems to me that there's a lot of trouble there. I think that essentially he's blown it. I think that Zelensky's blown it. He's blown his whole war, because Trump is just not even slightly impressed with Zelensky. And I have to say, I agree. Where do you stand on this?
Well, hang on a second. You say that, but in fairness to Zelensky, he's having to deal with an American president who, I'm not sure what 3 U-turns is. I think it still works out as a U-turn. But I mean, it is extraordinary that they have gone from a bust-up in the Oval Office to a make-up in the Vatican to another bust-up. And now it would appear a U-turn in that missiles are going to be sent from Trump to Ukraine. So, you know, from the Ukrainian perspective, I think it must be difficult for them to know exactly where they stand with America. What the hell is Trump playing at here? I mean, we've gone from him saying that he will not get involved to saying he's going to fix the war within 48 hours, to him apparently having an hour and a half long phone call with Putin a week ago, now reversing his decision in relation to the weapons. This is extremely troubling times, because there are still people dying on both sides, Russian soldiers, civilians in Ukraine. And it seems to have gone a little bit away from the news agenda. We had our focus turning, obviously, on what was happening with Iran. But meanwhile, Ukraine continues, and there is no sign of peace, which I felt maybe a month, 2 months ago, we were moving in a positive direction. That seems to have gone backwards.
I thought so too, but I'm with Donald Trump on this. I think that Donald Trump is saying...
You're saying that, but you don't know where Donald Trump is on this.
I do know where he is. He doesn't respect Zelensky. I don't respect Zelensky. He doesn't think Zelensky's done a good job, nor do I. And he thinks that European Union is absolutely pathetic and the coalition of the willing is a joke, as do I. So far, all the coalition of the willing, another Starmer failure, has done is caused a bunch of meetings to take place. No change in the war direction. Ukraine's still losing land slowly, but it's losing land. And Trump is saying, I'm going to sort this out with Putin, because you, Zelensky, are just a puppet of the very groups who lied to Russia, lied in 1990 when the West promised not to try to encroach with NATO right up to Russia's border. Totally broken promise. Now, we don't need to go through all of that, but unless you want to. But the reality is, I think Donald Trump's called out Zelensky for what he is, a professional comedian and a puppet for the West.
No, I think that's old. That's old news, if you don't mind me saying so, Len. But I think
I
that
do
was,
mind you saying so.
well, I'm going to say it anyway. It's old news. I mean, that was at one point Trump's position. I think that Trump has shifted. There's been a significant shift in his position, which is to be more pro-Ukraine and to be more hostile towards Putin. I think those around him probably said you got the balance wrong. You were coming across as being too favorable towards Putin. So I think there has been an address of that balance that's taken place. My concern is that the momentum which was building around talks, both triggered by Trump and the so-called alliance of the willing in Europe, that all seems to have disappeared. We need not for these world leaders to get bored with the subject or to get distracted by what's happening in Iran. We need them to remain focused during the summer period as they go off on their holidays, to not forget about what's happening in Ukraine.
Yeah, but they have, because it's no longer a trendy or attractive photo opportunity to be standing next to Zelensky. All Zelensky ever says to anybody is, "I need more weapons. Give me more weapons." Or he says, "Come and fight the fight for me, NATO." Those are his only two tricks. But I mean, I won't go through all the particular detailed military failures, but just about everything he's tried to do has been a failure. Almost everything he's tried to do is a failure.
He does need more weapons because they're getting through weapons incredibly fast. Whether you think they're misusing those or they're strategically incompetent is another issue. The fact is they do still need support.
No. I'm going to talk over you. You're never going to fill the bath if the plug's not in the plug hole. You'll never fill this bath, because however many weapons you send him, Russia will always be able to absolutely scale up. Russia's only using a small fraction of its military capacity. But the worst thing is Zelensky is incompetent when it comes to running a war. That's why they're running up and down streets, conscripting people, some of whom die 4 hours after they arrive in the front. And you mentioned deaths. It's really only Donald Trump. It's not Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron with their joke coalition of the wilting. It's Trump who endlessly talks about the thousands who die every week. And I have to say, this is one of the reasons I have so little respect for Macron and Starmer. They don't talk about the deaths the way that he does.
And I did admire Trump on this issue, that he was quick in on trying to resolve this. He recognized there were deaths on both sides, and he was the one that at least triggered discussion about peace. And then it was the Europeans that followed. I get that. I understand that. My concern now, frankly, is that Trump, the United Nations, NATO, the European leaders seem to have got bored of the issue. It seems to be that they're walking away from it and they're just accepting this is going to drag on. And it needs new energy. It needs new initiative. And it needs to re-engage in this issue quickly.
It doesn't need new energy. I said this before it was fashionable. I said this so much so that one of my clients outside broadcasting wondered whether they should carry on employing me, because I said, well, you need to see the Russian side of it. As it turns out, I was right on three things. Number one, that Zelensky wouldn't win. Number two, that Russia would persist, because this is a matter of principle in terms of defending their borders. And number three, that eventually the West, which has got terrible politicians at the moment, certainly in Europe, will eventually get bored and move on, because it's no longer a sexy picture. So all of that's happening. You didn't have to be a genius to work any of that out, but I think you had to be a fool not to spot it. And we've got fools in politics right now.
Well, we certainly seem to be lacking dynamic leadership, that's for sure. And we seem to be being distracted away from Ukraine by other, both international and domestic issues. And my plea really is that this July and August, this summer period, we don't forget. We don't let this disappear. We don't go to our holidays and read novels and not remember what's happening day in, day out in Ukraine. And so it does need new energy and new initiatives. Where that comes from, whether it's from Trump, Starmer or Macron, doesn't matter. But they do need to start looking again very, very positively, in my view, about trying to get around the table. Look, there've been some ceasefires, there've been some discussions and talks, but we've heard nothing more. We don't know why those talks have not continued. We don't know what the stumbling block was. They need to get back around the table, bluntly, Lembit.
Yeah, well, okay. And you mentioned you and I aren't going to resolve this now. If you were the Prime Minister and I was the Deputy, we would fix it. And no one can prove otherwise, Mark. So let's move on. Let's move on to domestic.
About that. Look, it's complicated, and I don't for any minute belittle it. But what I am frustrated about is that we seem to get tantalizingly close to being able to get round the table, and then the energy seems to disappear.
Let's finish on a more local subject. Maybe on this one we would agree. The woke police is coming to a workplace near you, thanks to the intellectual colossus that is Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner. It seems that as part of her employment legislation, she wants us to spy on each other. Let's have a look at this.
Too nicely. We're not allowed to do that, are we, basically? This is the land of misery. Angela Rayner. She's going to make sure that we're not allowed to have a joke. No politically incorrect humour here. And not just on air. We got Ofcom to do that, don't we? Oh, no, during advert breaks, at the water cooler, having a chit-chat over the bathroom stalls. It's all going to be under threat because her workers' rights bill, which is just a disaster and a mitigated disaster economically anyway, is going to pressurise firms to spy on inappropriate conversations.
Yes, you have to wonder whether the Labour Party are deliberately trying to make themselves the most loathed and detested and unpopular party in history.
That's it, off to the police cells for you. How dare you say that?
Once, an Englishman's home may be his castle, but so is the pub. And it seems as if they're going after, the core essence of what British and English identity are all about. And as you quite say, this is ridiculous. Essentially, they are trying to sow cotton wool employees that just overhearing the slightest risque joke may end up with not only you being barred, but with the employer of the pub being held liable.
But who sits there on high and decides what is an inappropriate conversation?
Well, this is the question. Imagine a situation where you have a gay employee in a restaurant and a Muslim employee. The gay employee is dealing with a table of Muslims and he finds their conversation insulting and offensive. The Muslim employee is dealing with a gay group and one on the other side. And both sides have obviously got grounds to be offended if they are so sensitive. There is no gauge for this. There's no legal definition of what offence is. It's a chilling crackdown on free speech. It's going to, the OBR and others have said, even the Equality and Rights Commission have said this is a broad brush which is going to severely impinge on free speech.
And that's the problem we've got. We've basically got an authoritarian government which has no understanding that in a free world you can choose to say things that others find offensive, Mark. In my definition of a free society, the fundamental tenet is this: I can't cause offense, but you can take it, because anything can be offensive. And we're so close now to this Orwellian police state where workers, for whatever reason, maybe they're bearing a grudge, snitch on each other for things that might not be very tasteful, that you might find offensive, but at the end of the day, for crying out loud, are not the business of the state to regulate.
Look, Lembit, you and I are both old enough and ugly enough to have lived through quite a lot of employment in different organizations, not least of which the House of Commons for many, many years. And there were things that were done and said around Parliament, for example, that were, in my view, unacceptable. But they were of that time, but actually they were wrong. And it's good that we have had more recently greater awareness of what it's like to work in a pleasant and a safe working environment. And it's good that we've had legislation to make sure that some of the worst aspects of that have been regulated. I think that was needed because there was a free-for-all which was unacceptable. However, where I agree with you is that we seem to be going a step too far now. We've got to get the balance right between, as you say, the freedom for individuals in the office, in the pub, to be able to speak and say their minds without it suddenly finding that they're in a work tribunal situation, they're losing their jobs, or that other colleagues bluntly are trying to, because of another work grudge, suddenly snitch on an employee for saying something. We do not want that culture in organization, but equally, we don't want to go back to the culture that was around in the 80s and part of the 90s in the BBC and the House of Commons, in those kind of institutions, which was also wrong as well.
No, I have a different view, actually, it turns out, Mark. Yeah, we don't need to have a culture. We need to not have a culture where the BBC employs known paedophiles and then basically covers it up. I agree with you on that. We don't need to have a culture where individuals are physically threatened or intimidated. Totally agree with that. Or people use their power for coercive, opportunistic reasons. But the difficulty I've got with all of this is simple. We have now got thought police, where if you tell a questionable joke, you could be up on a tribunal or fired. This is not the politics of the madhouse, the politics of tyranny. Because as the man said in that clip, a Muslim could be offended by a gay table, and a gay person could be offended by a Muslim table. Who's the arbiter? Angela Rayner? I don't think so. I don't think that she passed a philosophy degree. I don't think she's very well qualified for her job at all, to be honest. And she's certainly not qualified to understand these complicated questions of philosophical significance. And by the way, Mark, this is why I've ended up being supportive of Reform UK, because they still understand the meaning of free speech.
Well, firstly, I think you're slightly patronising towards Angela Rayner and making those kind of...
No, it's a fact. She has very few qualifications. And you either believe that qualifications matter or you don't. I think they matter.
They do not matter. What matters is whether you're competent and able to do your job. And she has risen through some really, really tough times to become Deputy Prime Minister. Whether you like it or not, I respect that. And I respect the role that she's got. And I am in no position to make comment on her intellectual abilities. So it's not... You can't
but
say...
you are.
Sorry,
Mark, that's just not, Mark, you can't have it both ways. We spent, when we were Liberal Democrat MPs, all the time, especially under the late Paddy Ashdown leader, we talked about education all the time. Tony Blair talked about the importance of education, which he stole, incidentally, from Lenin as a phrase. Everyone's been talking about the importance of education. And now you're saying, well, qualifications don't matter. This is the problem, Mark. We're in a society now where you can get somewhere without actually having the qualifications to do the job. How can you tell me that you don't have to be well qualified to be the Deputy Prime Minister?
No, that's crazy. Great. You're the one that's crazy on this, then, but you do not need to have a degree from one of the top universities or to have gone to private education anymore to achieve things in politics. And thank God for that as well. If you look at some of the most successful business people, they have no qualifications at all.
Oh, Alan Sugar, you mean?
Yeah, he's created a very, very successful business. And where were his qualifications? So
wait a minute, though.
When I joined the organization I'm in now, they had a policy about only employing people that had got university degrees. And I got rid of that completely so that people were allowed to join and come for an interview based on no qualifications whatsoever. And I would take an instinct about whether that person had the skills, the personality, the ambition, the desire to learn. That was more important for me than seeing whether they got a degree from Oxford or Cambridge. And I'm really clear in my mind about that. So let's not have patronizing comments.
Hang on, you're trying to take an absurd extreme position. I'm not saying you have to go to university in Oxford or Cambridge or even university, but you should have some qualifications, or otherwise let's stop pretending.
Well, what qualifications?
Let's stop pretending that you... Wait a minute. Let's stop pretending that education matters. Wait a minute, Mark. You're just going to shout me down. Don't do that. Let me just tell you this. I either believe in education is important or I don't. I either believe qualifications are important or I don't. Maybe, though, you've put your finger on something. This Labour Party maybe agrees with what you say, which is why they've started taxing private education, because actually they don't think these sorts of educational routes and qualifications are important. Maybe they all agree with you.
So has our education system produced us to be one of the greatest nations in the world and the greatest innovators, etc., etc.? Not necessarily so. I'm not sure that having loads of A levels and loads of qualifications in French, German, English language, English literature are necessarily the most important things. Would you, for example, say that at base level to achieve in life, you should have a maths O level or a maths qualification?
Yes.
I don't.
For a lot. Okay, if you want to be, sorry, you asked me a question, but you don't like the answer. That's why you're talking over me.
Because what I'm saying to you, Lembit, is
what you're saying to me is that you don't want to hear my answer. Let me explain why I said. Okay, why don't you talk? Go ahead. Go on.
You wouldn't have given me a chance. You just said that you should have a maths qualifications, so you would never have given me a chance. I have no qualifications in maths whatsoever.
I didn't say that. No, but you didn't want to hear my answer. What do you want? Yeah, right. Yes, if you want to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, you should be pretty well qualified in economics. If you want to be head of the Ministry of Defence, you should probably have some military experience, in my view. If you want to be, let's say, in charge of the health service, you should know something about medicine. If you want to be the Deputy Prime Minister, you should know quite a lot about politics. Now, maybe some people, the exceptions, Alan Sugar, can get through without having those qualifications. My issue, I don't want to just restrict this to Angela Rayner. That's what we were talking about. We seem to have drifted off that now. My issue is we now have a government that thinks like you. Oh, well, the qualifications aren't really important, which is why we have the worst qualified cabinet in British political history. And no surprise, the least popular cabinet and government at this time in British political history. There seems to be a bit of a cause and effect there, Mark.
Look, you're judging ability to run a country based on qualifications.
Yes, partly. Yes.
And academic qualifications.
Yes, partly. Yes.
To be a good politician, you need a gut instinct. You need to get it. You need to have common sense. You need to be able to inspire. You need to be able to lead. You need to be able to take tough decisions. These are the skill sets that we need our politicians to have. And I don't believe this cabinet has those skill sets. Whether they've got qualifications from universities or degrees or A-levels matters little to me. What matters to me is passion and leadership, and that is where they're lacking.
Okay, team, let's put that. I wasn't going to do this. Can we just get that earlier slide up? Yeah, the one. Yeah, can we see if we can get that onto the? Yeah, there we are. Now you brought this on yourself, Mark. I was going to drop this. This was a great moment in political history. Do you remember that moment?
It was a disastrous moment in political history. It was described by one of the commentators as the worst leadership campaign launch in history. We did it in a wind tunnel. All the journalists were blowing around and freezing cold. It was not our finest moments, Lembit, but your loyalty will never be forgotten.
Right. And I'm going to, here comes the sucker punch to you now. Wind tunnel, your choice. Right. This is when Mark Oaten wanted to be leader of the Liberal Democrats. There's me standing behind Mark. I have 2-1 upper second degree in philosophy. I've got a qualification in maths. I think I got a B in maths A level. You had no maths O level. I put it to you. That's why your campaign failed.
Oh my God! After all these years, I realised. Can I end this particular show with a quick little anecdote? So
yeah, go on.
I went back to my old school when I was a member of parliament to give, the awards and hand out the prizes. And I was making this very point. I said, look, I took my maths O level 4 times. And do you know what? I failed 3 and I never bothered to find out if I passed the 4th time. And I was trying to tell them this didn't matter in life. And while I was speaking, one of the teachers went off to the archives office. And when it came for the headmaster to give his vote of thanks at the end of my speech, he quickly said, oh, remember that 4th attempt for your O level? We just quickly checked in the archives. Yeah, you did fail that one as well.
I have to say, I salute your humility. You didn't have to share that with the world, but you did. Mark, I enjoyed that very much. You've been watching me, Lembit Öpik.
And me, Mark Oaten.
On what we now call A Very Liberal Life. Hope you've enjoyed it. You'll get more here on unprecedented.tv. This will be a regular fixture as well, as long as Mark's willing to come back and as long as I'm willing to come back too. So big thanks to the team. Big thanks to Mark. More than anything, big thanks to you. Let us know what you think in the chat. We'll see you next.